Good day, wherever you're tuning in from, and welcome to this exciting session for CyFy 2021. The title of our panel is Women at the Helm, Inclusive Change. I'm joined by a fabulous set of panelists who will be joining me in having a conversation, reflecting on the successes we've seen so far in getting women in tech, the pitfalls and the ways forth that we can take going forward. We know that women have been integral to scientific and technological progress for decades, yet their contributions are often rendered invisible. Today, building upon the achievements of the women who've paved the way, and there are many, and with the mainstreaming of prerogatives of equity and inclusion and even sustainability, more and more women are occupying a public role in pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So this session is bringing together change makers in startups, decision makers in industry, accelerators to discuss how they have triggered meaningful change, both within their own organizations and through their work. Ladies, I'm very pleased and honored to have a conversation with you all today. So without much further ado, let me come to Mahima first. Mahima, with buzzwords like tech for social good, AI for all, they're all becoming part of common parlance. Are these ideas simply a veneer, or are they translating into meaningful impact in the context of the rise of tech hype waves in developing countries?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the panel, and happy to kickstart the discussion. So, tech for social good, AI for all, those may be the buzzwords that we are familiar with today, but we all know the buzzwords, that marry sort of the social sector, the development sector, and the funders have existed for years, right? And so I try and answer this question from two sides. One is the time when I was actually writing applications to get funding, for nonprofits that I was working with. And then later I was in the, position to actually give out some funding as representing a big organization. So I think it's a double-edged sword. Like when you're with a small organization and you're trying to tell your story and you're trying to firstly, you're maybe even trying to make sense of what is it that you're actually doing. Like, the work that you're doing, but how does it fit into a larger narrative that you can explain to a broader audience? Maybe you want to talk to a bigger city. Maybe you want to talk to the country. Maybe you want to go international, right? And you want to be part of an international crowd. In those moments, a buzzword can actually come in to help you because that helps you focus and center what you're doing and actually plug into a larger story, which allows you to then get that space and that platform to talk about your project. On the flip side, what happens is that everybody's trying to pigeonhole what they are doing within a buzzword because that's where the funders and that's where the attention is. So a lot of projects that don't actually deserve to be in that particular category are trying to kind of retrofit themselves in. So, it can be useful, I think, to get a bunch of people together in a place where you can broadly understand what people are trying to do. But if the definition gets lost, and it just gets muddy along the way, and everyone's just saying they're doing this one thing, but really, they're not, and you can see that, then that does disservice to the entire group of people. So, I know others are nodding, so they probably have similar experiences from this. The responsibility, I think, from the funding end, what happens, and I know someone, I mean, most of you will have your own experiences when the pot of money gets really big and you're handing out funding to different social organizations. You may not actually pay attention to what the actual work is, as long as it looks like what they are saying they're doing. I think that's incorrect. I think that's wrong. I think that's a little bit lazy. I think, funders should really, really, understand what is it that they're funding, and if the projects are close to what they are trying to achieve, maybe they can help them, right? Or maybe they can learn from them and adjust what they are trying to fund, because they may think they're solving for, problem A, but they're actually creating problem B. And that you will only find out if you sit with the people who you're trying to help and you try, right? That's the only way. And, I may have represented a big tech company, but I live in India and it's a very complex company, and I've been in different sides of this conversation. So I'll leave it there for the rest of you to chime in. But I do think buzzwords, depending on how they're used, can be useful. And then, we know the rest of the story.
Thanks, Mahima. In my field as well, we used to call it creative nonfiction when you're trying to retrofit, as you said, buzzwords into the work, and it's really tricky to navigate the terrain of that being what you do versus using the language that gets the resources and the attention. Let me turn to Vanessa, who have at Ingressive, you guys have a full house, if you call it that, outfit going on that may have different perspectives to this. How are you navigating the world of buzzwords and still getting the cool work done?
Thank you so much, Nanjira. And significantly, I align. I love everything that Mahima just said, and honestly, I think sometimes when you want to have these conversations, you have to. There's a lot of compartmentalization that needs to go into it, and that is it comes from a point of you having to remove yourself sometimes from certain situations, but at the same time still being in the situation, because one of the things that you would always learn from branding and communication, which is at the end of the day my focus, is you always have to think like the consumer. You don't create things for yourself, you don't create services for yourself, you don't create products for yourself, you create for consumers. And because you create for consumers, you always have to think like consumers. So I think at the end of the day, it still boils down to the same thing, which is if you're internalizing, coming up with buzzwords, but your buzzwords don't necessarily align with your brand ethos, your brand communication, what it is that you're even selling in the first place, there's really no need for it. I mean, I will have no problem with people having like aspirational and inspirational, like communicative content being sent out there, because to be honest, people really need to be they need to be to feel like they're getting some level of aspiration from somewhere. Sometimes the countries are really hard. I live in Nigeria. I know sometimes I wake up in the morning, I don't want to do it anyway. I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm emotional. And then I see something that is really like, things pushing me. Oh, entrepreneurs are supposed to thrive. And then I see them like, yes, today I'm thriving. But if every single thing you're saying and all of the communication you're putting out there, it's not aligning with what your business is or your ethics is or the fund is, and that would mean that you're asking, like, some of your portfolio companies, you're asking for 40% from them. If you ask for 40%, what is left for other people to collect? All the other people who are going to want to invest in them, you take 40%, the next one comes and take 20. How does the founder himself or the portfolio company want to stand up every single day and work? Because they're working for you at the end of the day. And those are the things that when it comes to we're doing this ensuring that women come together or tech for women, and we do tech for women, but when you look through tech for women, we don't really see that actual headspace being incorporated. The businesses that you're running in itself doesn't have women in positions of decision making. The people that make the decision in the first place are not even women. A bunch of men that said, you know what, we want to do this just for lip service purposes. These are some of the things that. So again, it's pretty much, if you're gonna say it, I'm happy for it to happen as long as you're walking what you're talking. That's really all it is for me, and that I think is significant which is one of the things when it comes to tech. You find I was having a conversation with an old friend over the weekend, and we're talking about, there's some women who I'm looking at women who actually have funding for like women-owned fund, VC funds, who actually only are women-owned VC funds who fund for women, and literally we could count them on our hands. But we sit every single day knowing fully well that women are making strides. Women are making efforts. The most significant amount of women who have been able to thrive in terms of entrepreneurship are African women. These are information that we all know, yet we still have these type of problems, and we're talking about this in 2021.
Thanks, Vanessa. Your spirited comments reminded me of a whole other kind of worms, which is government and policy, really, which is hopefully being discussed in another panel discussion during CyFy. Let me bring in Khalila as well. I'm sure she has many insights to share with us as well on this one.
I'm just going to click my fingers for what everybody said before. And I'm just going to start with, I look at entrepreneurship in how it connects to leadership. For so long, these past few years, I feel that entrepreneurship as a concept has been popularized as the go-to place. It's been popularized as if you want to become famous and make a quick buck, and if you want to suddenly become, an influencer, become an entrepreneur. It's this alluring life that everybody wants to get. And hence, we've come into this space where it's no longer about problem solving and solving most of our community's key issues. It's become more about exactly what Vanessa mentioned. I want to show up and show face, and I want this kind of lifestyle. I want this kind of perception. We are all mimicking the Elon Musks of the world because that is the standard that has been set. And we have young entrepreneurs in Africa who are not connecting to the problems that are, they're on ground, but they're connecting to an image of an entrepreneur they're following on Instagram, which is a challenge because in most of the accelerator programs we have here in the country, and we run quite a few at Unleashed Africa, we have most of the examples, and I see that in the ecosystem, most of the examples are on Facebook, they are on Twitter, they are on Silicon Valley, they're on Elon Musk, and so on and so forth. We have examples that are existing in an environment as outside ours. Their contexts are completely different. Their backgrounds, their histories, the economics are completely different. But we have young people here trying to mimic a lifestyle and trying to mimic building enterprises in ways that are completely divided from what is contextual to us. And so right now, what I'm seeing is, if we're talking about buzzwords, that is the go-to. As long as you have, we talk about how it's diluting the entire context of problem solving that entrepreneurship brings. But one of the things is young people are hungry. Women are hungry. How do you get funding? You use buzzwords. The people who use the most buzzwords in a pitch get the money, regardless whether they are actually having the most impact on ground or not. And hence, we have created a systemic issue that is now creating exactly what we say. And I refer to Africa because that's the ground where I'm from. We say the biggest problems that we have is leaders. And I'm like, I look at entrepreneurs as leaders. And I'm saying now we have another issue because we have entrepreneurs who are mimicking something that does not necessarily bring impact, because here we are trying to live lives that are completely outside of us. So we have systemic issue after systemic issue. I feel that one of the biggest issues that we're missing is authentic entrepreneurship. Authentic entrepreneurship that is grounded in, hey, there's a problem here and I want to solve it. Whether I am using technology, whether I am using just connecting things together. But something that I want to mention is I see a lot more women actually connecting to problem solving as they go into entrepreneurship. Because why? There's a problem. And most of the problems that we have on ground, societal, economic issues, they affect who the most? Women the most. So, we have people going into entrepreneurship, wanting to solve a problem, but not having the skills, the tools, the support that they need to actually solve their problems on ground. Why? Because these are the buzzwords that you need to use, right? So on one end, we have issues. You mentioned, you touched a little bit on the political environment, but I won't go into that. we have an issue there. But then on the other hand, if I'm talking about investment, the investment climate and how it's been structured at this point, and I'll go also into accelerator programs and people who are trying to support and build the ecosystems. We have an issue starting from there. Why? Because programs that are supposed to aid are now telling people that you need to, if you don't have a business model that looks like this, you're not going to make it. It's always important to talk to an entrepreneur about what kind of life do you want to build? What kind of solution do you want to build? Not just about the solution, but what kind of life do you want to build? We have too many entrepreneurs who are public successes and private failures because we're busy living a life that everybody wants to see. And my biggest pain point is a lot of young women are falling into this trap right now. We have created a problem that is disadvantaging the young people that are stepping into entrepreneurship. And I look at young women who are hurting. And if I'm talking about young women and entrepreneurs, the dynamics are wide. There are young women who are not mothers. There are those who are mothers, young women whose families depend on them. We have now told them that you have to build 1, 2, 3. And when they don't, we beat them on the head, upside the head and say that you're not doing it right. You can't get an investment. But when you go on ground, the impact that they're having is massive. But then the support is not matching what they're doing. And so we have many young women giving up or stepping into using buzzwords. I'll just close with this so we can move on. I gave an example to a funder the other day, actually, I think last week. And I told her, listen, I know of an entrepreneur, I won't mention from one country, who got a funding for $500,000. Not African, but they do work in Africa. And what they ended up doing, it was an awareness campaign. They ended up they put up a billboard on they had one billboard up, and they took a photo of that billboard and they duplicated it and made it look like it was 500 billboards. And they sent that back to the funder. And this program and this project was, celebrated as a success. And I know it was one billboard. So I talked to this entrepreneur and I asked, okay, so how do you go to sleep at night? And what they say is, I'm doing exactly what the system told me to do. And at the end of the day, I'll go and give money to church. This is exactly what the system wants. If this is what the system is creating us to become, then this is who we need to become, because we need to live. That in itself should put us all on our feet and on our toes and realize that we are creating a big problem. And the question is now, how do we start unpacking and get to a point where we can really look at all the skeletons in the closets which we've closed up right now and have these authentic conversations more and more?
So if I'm going to say something, I would say that the biggest thing that, if I've learned anything working in the corporate world thus far, is the biggest thing is allies. When you have allies, and when you're having allies, I don't mean it from a point of men, women. It's people who come together to ensure that if I ever get to a point where I am at a point I can help you, I will do that, as opposed to just saying, I got here, took me a while, you have to walk the walk and talk the talk, or whatever it is that happens. That's one. The other thing I'm going to say is, in all honesty, I don't want this to come off a certain way, but if there's anything I've learned from my MDs, she doesn't look at herself as man or woman. She looks at herself as, my Hogan family dream, looks at herself as person. Doesn't mean that she doesn't receive the impact of whatever it is that the rubbles of what happens, when it comes to relegation. But she looks at herself as person, which means that if I keep saying that the reason I don't achieve X, Y, and Z is because I'm female, or because I'm a woman, or because I am single, or because I'm not married, or because X, Y, one of the 1 million excuses that we get, not to invalidate any of those things. But if you keep looking at yourself like that, you will always see yourself as a victim. And because of that, it makes her work 3 times as hard, no problem. But the thing is, it doesn't prevent you from being able to do the job, because at the end of the day, just like you just said, Khalila, it says, at what point do you now stop seeing yourself as putting yourself in a situation because, in quotes, the system has taught me to be this way, as opposed to putting yourself with, this is the walk that I walk, this is the talk that I talk. I will not let a system remove me from my beliefs and my thought processes and all of the hard work that I've put in. Like you said as well, Khalila, you mentioned the fact that there are women who are literally treating problems, dealing with problems. And at the end of the day, if you even ever really believe in yourself and even the work that you're doing, you never want to taint that. You never want to taint that quality of effort that you've put into all of those things, because you know the hard work it took you to get there. And this is why it is even more amazing and beautiful when you've achieved it, when you're receiving success stories that are telling you this is what you, because at the end of the day, it's not just a passion project. You have now gone from being a passion project to you have made impact, you did it, and you did it well. And that's one of the things I think most women need to constantly hear, which is why I said we need allies. It doesn't matter if it's a man. As a human being to human being, I will always say this: the first thing we are is, before we're a man or woman, is we're human. And as human being to human being, I would not see someone else going through X, Y, and Z. I don't care if you're male, I don't care if you're female, and I'm sitting down there and just letting you suffer. Especially if I know like it's very undeserving. If it is deserving, I mean, let's, to each his own. But my point is, as from human to human, which is why it's always important to think about it like that. It's like, why are you thinking about trying to hire someone? You're like, oh, like we have more women in the company. No, we have more qualified staff in the company. we have more men in the company. Yes, you have more men in the company, we have more qualified staff. If you ever think about it and you have to say, oh, the reason, and if you ever find yourself in a situation where there is a significant amount of like population that is, you know, a lot of those people there, but you're not looking at other like diverse, because life is not very linear. There are multiple different forces to it. There's culture, there's diversity, there is color, there is race, there is sex, like there's a bunch of things. There's gender, like what are you talking about? So when you want to deal with conversations and like, oh, everybody that we're supposed to hire for HR should be female because only women understand. No, that's not true. Only people we hire for engineering should be men because that's not true.
So
only
true.
people we
So
hire
true,
for
Vanessa.
should be men, and then maybe a few women, but then they should be in administrative roles. That's not true. So again, evaluate. And that's why the first thing I always talk about when I talk to any of our portfolio companies is specific. What is your brand ethos? What is your brand plan? If you ever think about it, that's how you know. Because the day they wake up in the morning and tell you, if Nike wakes up and tells us, they've been telling us we can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And then you tell us that the women in your company cannot do it, and the pregnant women in your company cannot do it, and there were men that are, or you know, not even going into any of those in 3 cases, can't do it. Why the hell have you been selling to me that we can do it? Because then you're lying to me. Because I reckon that we can do it. So again, I just wanted to piggyback on what Khalila said and back to everything that Mahima had said prior. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, ladies, for showing that, you know, first of all, it's such a complex and multi-layered issue. That sometimes when folks talk about women in tech, it's a pigeonholing in some sense, you know, to the aspects you've all talked about. These issues that affect women more adversely are for women to handle and not for the whole system to actually to see the indictment that it is, right? Then we're sent off to a wilderness, whether it's entrepreneurship, as Khalila's brilliantly put out, or these adverse models that are not appropriate to our contexts and the things we're trying to solve. And here, for example, as I want to segue to the next question, you see a lot of rush to have funding or support for addressing social issues and adverse social norms, for example, gender-based violence using tech, right? This notion that we'll build an AI integrated something or other, blockchain for, I don't know, hunger or whatever. I mean, in your experience, how have you been in a position where you've encountered that and had to resist that pressure to blockchain it, to AI it, when you're really dealing with, you know, a complex, multi-layered issue, where at some point you even say thank you, but no thank you. I'm curious about how you're navigating those terrains. Who are you challenging to change their thinking? And how can we advance this conversation for it to be registering as the complexity that it is? Mahima, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So can't speak to AI for hunger, though I'm sure someone is working on that right now. But, you know, in my experience, you know, a very interesting example that I can give you, and I think you'll all relate to, was, you know, there have been so many projects, some obviously more successful than others, about being able to give like voice to everyone. So women should be able to have a voice, like, you know, because obviously traditional media, as you know, has been captured by the elites. And, you know, in the elites, a lot of times it is like the men, you know, that you know, in the Western world, they say that white man sort of thing, but it's the same in most countries if you see that power structure. So I think some of the projects that have involved giving people, you know, minorities and women and other folks who maybe did not have access to speaking up, these tools, but these tools actually people weren't prepared for the social consequences of what would happen. The first thing is, if you're ever speaking up in a place where, you know, you're not necessarily welcome, or you're going to say something which is going to challenge people's, you know, all their how they view the world, and it's really going to shake them to the core, there's going to be a lot of pushback, right? There's going to be a lot of pushback, and you're probably the app or that, you know, website or, you know, the project, they encourage them to speak up in the first place. And you came up with these, you know, these brand mottos, you know, and you really encourage people. And so I think what happens is you come back and you realize, well, it's different. We have to like be able to provide a lot of safety and security and tools, and our organization needs to understand what's happening on the ground, because what suits one society where interpretation of freedom, or what people get offended by, or what would actually make someone withdraw versus feel, you know, empowered to keep going, like all these things change depending on where you're placed in the world, depending on who you are as a person. So I think, when people come up with these tech solutions, and I would find it kind of funny sometimes, and I would go to San Francisco for trips, and I would, hear people talk, over cocktails about the apps that they're creating for problems in the developing world. And I would actually just wonder to myself, I don't think they've ever been there. I don't even think they know what they're talking about, but they are definitely going to get funding to get this done. So I think like that understanding and giving yourself that time to adapt is important. The other thing that I think is very important is, you can have global tools that people will use around the world, and we are all using some of them. But it really is but equally, we need to encourage local talent and local entrepreneurship, and that's probably what the rest of the panel is going to talk about, because it's great. Like, everybody needs a few global brands. I mean, we have it in everything, right? You've got some global airlines, you've got some global food brands, but then local is obviously what people prefer, because it is so it's attuned to what's going on. And I think that also creates the jobs. I mean, one other reason for entrepreneurship, it was so interesting to hear what you said, Khalila, because I sort of didn't think about that whole like Instagram trying to be the lifestyle part of it, but I definitely think that like the jobs part of it is huge, right? Like, traditional sectors can only provide so many jobs, and so everyone's encouraged to be an entrepreneur, because you can create like a new industry, you can create new jobs, and that's where like the growth is going to come from. So there's also pressure to just keep telling people to start startups, and like just keep giving them money in case something takes up. And there are different motivations for encouraging this. So yeah, I think investors, they need to be a little more educated. They need to listen to the markets that they're going into. Some companies have dived in nose first and had, shocks to their system in terms of the fact that you can't just export something without understanding what that place is all about. And some people have been really smart, and they've actually operated in the country, I mean, a global platform I'm talking about, for 2-3 years, sort of, under the radar, trying to understand the implications, trying to like get local know-how, so that when they launch, they actually know what they're doing in a particular market. But I think it's like I said, I think the local talent has to be encouraged. And when you make those profits and you're at that scale, you need to encourage local talent, you need to fund them, and you need to transfer your expertise to them. It's not enough to just give a project, a little bit of funding and say, you go, girl. But it's more like, if you have these amazing engineers and you've got these coders and you've got all these people, make them accessible, transfer that knowledge, just not just the money. And I think that's where the change will come.
Yeah, so true. I mean, and one big challenge, especially when a lot of these heady, hypey type initiatives are launched and we all rush into them, is a question of actually what outlives them and how does that outlive. So fine, even if the AI or the blockchain is marginal impact or success, does it outlive the initial investment? Does it outlive the hype, the funding cycle? What actually stays behind once that spotlight has shifted? Khalila, I don't know if you want to come in on I mean, I feel like you've resisted some of this nuances and narratives. So please feel free to jump in.
So definitely, like, in terms of like, where do I start? Right now, you're an entrepreneur, throw tech at it, throw coding at it, throw AI at it. Heck, right now, throw quantum physics into it, and that opens doors where people are amazed that the fact that you know this jargon and you can speak these languages. But the biggest issue that I always go back to, and the biggest issue where people like me might take a longer time to actually scale, is I go back to people and I'm like, that doesn't work on ground. Technology can help us scale and help us solve problems faster, yes, but not in that form at this point, not for these people. And somebody will give me an example, oh, how come it worked in Nigeria? I'm like, but do remember that like we have completely different cultures, different nuances. Something that works in Lagos might not necessarily work in Wari. And these are places in Nigeria. Something that works in Dar es Salaam in itself is a city in Tanzania. Something that works in one district might not work in another, because we're such dynamic people, and it's so important to recognize those nuances. So it's, as much as an organization or as a funder or a support agency comes in to want to share their learnings and their technology and the best practices, the most critical thing that people need to do is to come in with a listening heart, to want to come in and learn about what is actually going on ground. What are the things that make these people tick? What are the things that make these communities tick? Because then otherwise, what ends up happening is we kill lines of trust. Because then you have the entrepreneur, the funder, and you have the people. And the people look at the entrepreneur as a traitor, because here you are bringing the solutions that don't work for us. You've become the other. You have become one of them, and you're not necessarily connected to our issues. Right now, I came from TRA, Tanzania Revenue Authority, this morning, and we have a massive number of startups that have come up, a massive number of tech startups that have come up, a massive number of companies that have come up. And this is not just in Tanzania, I'm talking about East Africa in general, that are mimicking solutions in Silicon Valley for Africa, saying that this will solve a problem for the Maasai in Arusha. And I sit down and wonder, how in heaven's name did the person on the other hand actually give you funding? But yes, that's how you get funding. But then, the only way to escape this is an authentic connection to purpose. And I go back to, I love this whole concept of Ubuntu. I go back to Ubuntu. If truly, as a person, you are connected to the ethos of what made you start in the first place, and you don't disconnect to it, and you're really committed to systemic change or catalyzing systemic change, you will stand grounded and stand firm. And I love what you said about allies. In doing that, we need to create communities of people who believe in the same thing. Because right now we're speaking about this as a challenge, but the fact of the matter is it's not so dire, because there are people like us speaking about it, and there are people who are actually standing firm and doing stuff about them. The only issues is we exist in silos. How do we break these silos? How do we have people coming together saying, well, this is not the way, this is the best way to go about it, and let's stand together and push for collective systemic change? Because then unless we do that and find communities like this, I love CyFy as a platform. Now, the challenge is, when somebody listens to this conversation, will they reach out to people here? How do we keep the connections going? How do we ask questions? How do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be challenged? Because it's also about being challenged and allowing yourself to learn and say, well, maybe the way I'm thinking is perhaps at this point outdated. And perhaps there's something new I could learn that could make, one, this technology better, two, that could make us create a completely different new solution that the world has never seen, that could help us innovate differently. So how do we allow ourselves to learn? And then just to touch on something you said, Fahima, about jobs and entrepreneurship. Absolutely. Entrepreneurship. And I love the whole concept of social entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship in itself, the promise of jobs is huge. But we also have to align with the fact that a lot of people get into entrepreneurship because what? There are no jobs. And so we become self-employed and we start these businesses, and then you're called an entrepreneur. The entire reflection and definition of entrepreneurship has become very, what's the word? It's become very, very mudded right now, right? Self-employment, business person, entrepreneur. And hence, the accelerator programs, the support systems, they are mixing everybody together. We're mixing everybody together. And we end up missing the entire ethos of what it means to be an entrepreneur in itself. And I do believe that we need to wake up and truly create programs for entrepreneurs, people who want to create jobs, and realize that most of the models that we have going on are great if they work for a person who wants to grow a business. If we want to exemplify and celebrate a person, which is most of the models that we see, it's the person. It's the person. It's the company, but a company connected to a person, right? Because then this is the person that we invite on panels. This is the person that we invite out there. This is the person who wins the awards. But what happens to the people behind them? I think we have to completely reframe how we're looking at this entire structure and restructure and allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to accept that we need to change. And of course, it starts with each one of us questioning the way that we do things that we do, and allowing ourselves to challenge other people because we don't like being challenged. And it's also uncomfortable challenging the status quo. But right now, this entire ecosystem has a status quo that is not working. It's dead. And so if change is going to happen, we have to allow ourselves to mature and, blossom from the caterpillar to the butterfly. I had to end with something dramatic.
Beautifully put. And there's so much there we could go into. And before I bring in Vanessa, it's fascinating because one, we cannot entrepreneur our way out of bad public policy. That's coming up in all the country contexts we've discussed. Secondly, it's a bit concerning then that we're all just in a sense in a mold, right? Whether it's the women in tech, whether it's the tech itself, the entrepreneur, whatever entrepreneurship has become a blur to mean. And it's concerning and how to challenge the fact that this is such a diverse world, but it's quite concerning in a way that we're speaking in India, in Tanzania, in Nigeria, in Kenya, about something that's seeming like a monolithic approach to tackling such huge issues. So I always go back to something that has been said: we can entrepreneur, but we cannot entrepreneur ourselves out of bad public policy, which is always a huge grounding element here. But again, we said the policy thing is for another panel, hopefully, because we need our policymakers in that conversation, or policy breakers, depending on how we call them. Vanessa, I don't know how your reflections on having a more for-profit model and a non-profit model as well. You guys have, again, a full in-house element at Ingressive. How are you navigating all these complexities? How do you ensure that, the folks the portfolios that you're building, you're giving them that flexibility, as we're just discussing here, to say it's not the maybe even not the tech, right? And the tech, we always forget, can still be pen and paper. That really fascinates me. And the second bit being, I think Khalila and Mahima were already alluding to, this value that I think has been seeded as scale is robbing us of what is sustainable. And then having scale as that interoperability of what works in different contexts being put together in an interoperable system. But as folks who are funding and running, not-for-profit elements, how are you navigating this thing that grounds you towards the complexity and of these issues that we're trying to tackle through tech or otherwise?
First, I'm going to say something. We have done this entire chat and nobody has said, "Hi, you're on mute." I love that. Really amazing.
We're doing good.
We have figured this out. Love it. That. The other part is, firstly, Ingressive Capital is a strictly for-profit fund, and whenever I speak about this, I speak about it with from a point of not just pride, but even passion, because I work with someone who literally feels like believes in the entirety of what it is to be living on the outside and seeing what it is on the inside and not being able to do anything about it. Maya literally was in the US, working at a private equity. So Maya is my MD. She is MD of Ingressive Capital. And she was doing that and then seeing there's so many things that needs to be done in Africa. So many things. You can't go to bed at night, wake up in the morning, you don't really feel peace, because at the end of the day, you know fully well that there are so many things that needs to be done, and there's so many opportunities that needs to be reached. And so you sit there, and when she made the decision to come here, she started out the advisory, which is pretty much just bringing people here and letting people know these opportunities that can help you connect to these people. It was nice until Ingressive Capital started, when we now started doing the funding for actual businesses. And then there's Ingressive for Good, which is our nonprofit, where we actually teach people to actually hone their skills from university up until when they decide they want to start a business, and provide them with opportunities, laptops, things like that, just so they're able to grow themselves, to be potential founders moving forward. One of the things we will always say at Ingressive is an actual pipeline. So we literally take you from point A to point C, which is if you start as a learner, someone who is growing, someone who is trying to establish themselves, you can still end up being a founder, and at the end of the day, IPO. That would be lovely. And that's a storyline that has dragged, or literally has been what we have been pushing at Ingressive. But currently, 64% of our staff is female. Almost 40% of our portfolio companies are either co-founded by women or managed managerial positions. The intentionality behind that, again, I keep going back to meritocracy, because I never really want it to be a matter of we just put them there. It always goes back to the same thing. There are the skills, there are the opportunities, they are being filled. I'm going to give you a very random story. I remember when I was going to get the job for head of communications and growth, and I had thought about it. So I was like, nope, not going to get it. Not to sound a certain way, it doesn't make me feel a certain way. To be honest, I feel like it's actually a very significant story that I think everyone needs to hear and understand. That it's what happens when we, as people, find ourselves just putting ourselves down to prevent ourselves from getting to what we're supposed to get. And I really didn't think it was something that was possible. And then I had done it, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna get the job, because there's all these men that know all these very interesting things. But then I didn't know that one of the things that needed to happen at Ingressive was soul. And soul is a significant part of every single thing that Khalila talked about, Mahima talked about, even yourself, Nanjira, talked about, which is putting in not just the work, but putting in soul. So when Khalila is talking about Ubuntu, and she's like, if you see yourself in a particular position, you know what it is in your heart of hearts. Nothing pushes you above and beyond, because at the end of the day, you know why you started doing in the first place. That's what it is. So going back to the conversation that we're talking about, is pretty much that what we are doing is ensuring that Ingressive capital might be significantly profit, but we are literally building a pipeline of what the many facets are, because we never want to leave people behind. We want to ensure that even if we're profiting from here, we're ensuring that there is benefit from this particular part that will route you back to us. One of the things that we do is we're literally trying to communicate to early stage startups at the moment. And then there's I forget who said, in terms of when we were talking about speak, it's like, oh, we have up to 400K tech. We had at the time we were saying it was 100K to 400K ticket sizes. But technically, we actually are looking to also find people who have less than, who don't really need that, but then also have opportunities and businesses and products and services that we can actually serve. And that also mean that, no, it doesn't actually have to be up to that, because then you're now saying, well, I have to have my business model put in place, I have to have this put in place and all of those things. As long as we see the potentiality of what you represent, that's really what it is. I'm not saying we're bare minimum or basic or whatever. I'm also just saying that we're looking at, structure. We're looking at the people that have passion. We're looking at people that have grit, and all of those things put together with a business model that works is literally how we're trying to navigate. And finally, when Mahima talked about, I think it was Khalila said it, that talked about how do we ensure that all of us are doing all of these things with everyone in place. You love CY, FY, you're like, no, it's this conversation we're having now, which means that the next time that something is happening on your end, you're messaging me, hi Vanessa, we have this coming up. Are you interested in being a part of this? And we're gonna be like, oh yeah, I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to do it. I'm willing to participate in this. Anyone who watches this sees, okay, I can easily reach out, because obviously there's one of the things I want to talk about just to round up this is just the fact that gatekeepers is not a thing. You only make them a thing when you give them the power to do that. It's not a thing. They don't exist. If you make gatekeepers a thing, you only give them the power to make that a thing. Nobody prevents you from reaching out to Nanjira. Nobody prevents you from reaching out to nobody prevents you from reaching out to Khalila. Nobody prevents you from reaching out to Mahima. Nobody does that. Nobody prevents you from reaching out to Vanessa. Hi, I watched this. I really am interested in working with you guys. Literally, there's no part of our work that makes us want to feel like, oh, we're feeling some type of way to prevent you from getting access. Because again, gatekeepers is a thing, but you only make it a thing when you decide that they're relevant enough. And on that note, I drop my mic. Yeah.
Mic dropped. That registers very profoundly. I can't believe we're up at time, and I love this conversation because it's not one to condense into takeaways. It's one that should ideally expand the horizons around how we're thinking about women in tech or tech's role in change in our societies. And thank you so much, lovely ladies, for bringing us into what has just been called a starting conversation indeed, that we hope that really brings a new perspective to how we talk about women in tech. What does that actually mean? Do we need to mold it or break the mold again and hopefully not get into more molds and navigate a world that has so many complexities, and analog and digital, as they're called, which is a binary that doesn't even exist anymore. Thank you for sharing such wide-ranging perspectives that have shown us that this is just the start of really shaping what we want as women in tech, or whatever buzzword will fit in the intersection of tech, women, and societal change. Mahima, Khalila, Vanessa, it has been a pleasure, and I celebrate you all. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me in this conversation. I hope you enjoyed the panel, and please look out for these ladies. I'm sure that you can find them on the internet doing amazing stuff. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much.